Matthew Henry Bible Commentary 2 Kings Book of 2 Kings chapter 17. This chapter gives us an account of the captivity of the 10 tribes, and so finishes the history of that kingdom. After it had continued about 265 years, from the setting up of Jeroboam the son of Nebat. In it we have a short narrative of this destruction, verse 1 to 6. 2. Remarks upon it, and the causes of it, for the justifying of God in it, and for warning to others, verse 7 to 23. 3. An account of the nations which succeeded them in the possession of their land, and the mongrel religions set up among them, verse 24 to 41. Samaria besieged by the Assyrians, Israel subdued by Assyria, 730 BC. 1. In the 12th year of Ahaz king of Judah began Hoshea the son of Elah to reign in Samaria over Israel 9 years. 2. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, but not as the kings of Israel that were before him. 3. Against him came up Shalmaneser king of Assyria, and Hoshea became his servant, and gave him presents. 4. And the king of Assyria found conspiracy in Hoshea, for he had sent messengers to So king of Egypt, and brought no present to the king of Assyria, as he had done year by year. Therefore the king of Assyria shut him up, and bound him in prison. 5. Then the king of Assyria came up throughout all the land, and went up to Samaria, and besieged it 3 years. 6. In the 9th year of Hoshea the king of Assyria took Samaria, and carried Israel away into Assyria, and placed them in Hala and in Habor by the river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes. We have here the reign and ruin of Hoshea, the last of the kings of Israel, concerning whom observe, that, though he forced his way to the crown by treason and murder, as we read ch. 1530, yet he gained not the possession of it till 7 or 8 years after, for it was in the 4th year of Ahaz that he slew Pekah, but did not himself begin to reign till the 12th year of Ahaz, v. 1. Whether by the king of Assyria, or by the king of Judah, or by some of his own people, does not appear, but it seems so long he was kept out of the throne he aimed at. Justly were his bad practices thus chastised, and the word of the prophet was thus fulfilled. Hos 10:3. Now they shall say we have no king, because we feared not the Lord. 2. That, though he was bad, yet not so bad as the kings of Israel had been before him, v. 2. Not so devoted to the calves as they had been. One of them, that at Dan, the Jews say, had been, before this, carried away by the king of Assyria in the expedition recorded ch. 1529, to which perhaps the prophet refers, Hos 8:5. Thy calf, O Samaria, has cast thee off, which made him put the less confidence in the other. And some say that this Hoshea took off the embargo which the former kings had put their subjects under, forbidding them to go up to Jerusalem to worship, which he permitted those to do that had a mind to it. But what shall we think of this dispensation of providence, that the destruction of the kingdom of Israel should come in the reign of one of the best of its kings? Thy judgments, O God, are a great deep. God would hereby show that in bringing this ruin upon them he designed to punish, 1. Not only the sins of that generation, but of the foregoing ages, and to reckon for the iniquities of their fathers, who had been long in filing the measure, and treasuring up wrath against this day of wrath. 2. Not only the sins of their kings, but the sins of the people. If Hoshea was not so bad as the former kings, yet the people were as bad as those that went before them, and it was an aggravation of their badness, and brought ruin the sooner, that their king did not set them so bad an example as the former kings had done, nor hinder them from reforming. He gave them leave to do better, but they did as bad as ever, which laid the blame of their sin and ruin wholly upon themselves. 3. That the destruction came gradually. They were for some time made tributaries before they were made captives to the king of Assyria, v. 3. And, if that less judgment had prevailed to humble and reform them, the greater would have been prevented. 4. That they brought it upon themselves by the indirect course they took to shake off the yoke of the king of Assyria, v. 4. Had the king and people of Israel applied to God, made their peace with him and their prayers to him, they might have recovered their liberty, ease, and honor, but they withheld their tribute and trusted to the king of Egypt to assist them in their revolt, which, if it had taken effect, would have been but to change their oppressors. But Egypt became to them the staff of a broken reed. This provoked the king of Assyria to proceed against them with the more severity. Men get nothing by struggling with the net, but entangle themselves the more. V. That it was an utter destruction that came upon them. 1. The king of Israel was made a prisoner. He was shut up and bound, being, it is probable, taken by surprise before Samaria was besieged. 2. The land of Israel was made a prey. The army of the king of Assyria came up throughout all the land, made themselves master of it. V. 5. And treated the people as traitors to be punished with the sword of justice rather than as fair enemies. 3. The royal city of Israel was besieged and at length taken. 3 years it held out after the country was conquered, and no doubt a great deal of misery was endured at that time, which is not particularly recorded, but the brevity of the story and the passing of this matter over lightly, methinks, intimate that they were abandoned of God, and he did not now regard the affliction of Israel, as sometimes as he had done. 4. The people of Israel were carried captives into Assyria, v. 6. The generality of the people, those that were of any note, were forced away into the conqueror's country, to be slaves and beggars there. 1. Thus he was pleased to exercise a dominion over them, and to show that they were entirely at his disposal. 2. By depriving them of their possessions and estates, real and personal, and exposing them to all the hardships and reproaches of a removal to a strange country under the power of an imperious army, he chastised them for their rebellion and their endeavor to shake off his yoke. 3. Thus he effectually prevented all such attempts for the future and secured their country to himself. 4. Thus he got the benefit of their service in his own country, as Pharaoh did that of their fathers, and so this unworthy people were lost as they were found, and ended as they began, in servitude and under oppression. 5. Thus he made room for those of his own country that had little, and little to do, at home, to settle in a good land, a land flowing with milk and honey. In all these several ways he served himself by this captivity of the 10 tribes. We are here told in what places of his kingdom he disposed of them, in Hala and Habor, in places, we may suppose, far distant from each other, lest they should keep up a correspondence, incorporate again, and become formidable. There, we have reason to think, after some time they were so mingled with the nations that they were lost, and the name of Israel was no more in remembrance. Those that forgot God were themselves forgotten. Those that studied to be like the nations were buried among them, and those that would not serve God in their own land were made to serve their enemies in a strange land. It is probable that they were the men of honor and estates who were carried captive, and that many of the meaner sort of people were left behind, many of every tribe, who either went over to Judah or became subject to the Assyrian colonies, and their posterity were Galileans or Samaritans. But thus ended Israel as a nation. Now they became Lo-Ami, not a people, and Lo-Ruhamah, unpitied. Now Canaan spurred them out. When we read of their entry under Hosea the son of Nun, who would have thought that such as this should be their exit under Hosea the son of Elah? Thus Rome's glory in Augusta sunk, many ages after, in Augustulus. Providence so ordered the eclipsing of the honor of the 10 tribes that the honor of Judah, the royal tribe, and Levi, the holy tribe, which yet remained, might shine the brighter. Yet we find a number sealed of every one of the 12 tribes, Rev 7, except Dan. James writes to the 12 tribes scattered abroad, Jam 1:1, and Paul speaks of the 12 tribes which instantly served God day and night, Acts 26:7, so that though we never read of those that were carried captive, nor have any reason to credit the conjecture of some, that they yet remain a distinct body in some remote corner of the world, yet a remnant of them did escape, to keep up the name of Israel, till it came to be worn by the gospel church, the spiritual Israel, in which it will ever remain. Gal 6:16. The wickedness of Israel, 730 BC. 7 For so it was, that the children of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, which had brought them up out of the land of Egypt, from under the hand of Pharaoh king of Egypt, and had feared other gods, 8 And walked in the statutes of the heathen, whom the Lord cast out from before the children of Israel, and of the kings of Israel, which they had made. 9 And the children of Israel did secretly those things that were not right against the Lord their God, And they built them high places in all their cities, from the tower of the watchman to the fenced city. 10. And they set them up images and groves in every high hill, and under every green tree. 11. And there they burnt incense in all the high places, as did the heathen whom the Lord carried away before them, and wrought wicked things to provoke the Lord to anger. 12. For they served idols, whereof the Lord had said unto them, Ye shall not do this thing. 13. Yet the Lord testified against Israel and against Judah by all the prophets and by all the seers, saying, Turn ye from your evil ways, and keep my commandments and my statutes, according to all the law which I commanded your fathers, and which I sent to you by my servants the prophets. 14. Notwithstanding they would not hear, but hardened their necks, like to the neck of their fathers, that did not believe in the Lord their God. 15. And they rejected his statutes, and his covenant that he made with their fathers, and his testimonies which he testified against them, and they followed vanity, and became vain, and went after the heathen that were round about them, concerning whom the Lord had charged them, that they should not do like them. 16. And they left all the commandments of the Lord their God, and made them molten images, even 2 calves, and made a grove, and worshipped all the host of heaven, and served Baal. 17. And they caused their sons and their daughters to pass through the fire, and used divination and enchantments, and sold themselves to do evil in the sight of the Lord, to provoke him to anger. 18. Therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel, and removed them out of his sight. There was none left, but the tribe of Judah only. 19. Also Judah kept not the commandments of the Lord their God, but walked in the statutes of Israel which they made. 20. And the Lord rejected all the seed of Israel, and afflicted them, and delivered them into the hand of spoilers, until he had cast them out of his sight. 21. For he rent Israel from the house of David, and they made Jeroboam the son of Nebat king, and Jeroboam drave Israel from following the Lord, and made them sin a great sin. 22. For the children of Israel walked in all the sins of Jeroboam which he did. They departed not from them. 23. Until the Lord removed Israel out of his sight, as he had said by all his servants the prophets. So was Israel carried away out of their own land to Assyria unto this day. Though the destruction of the kingdom of the 10 tribes was but briefly related, it is in these verses largely commented upon by our historian, and the reasons of it assigned, not taken from the second causes, the weakness of Israel, their impolitic management, and the strength and growing greatness of the Assyrian monarch. These things are overlooked, but only from the first cause. Observe 1. It was the Lord that removed Israel out of his sight. Whoever were the instruments, he was the author of this calamity. It was destruction from the Almighty. The Assyrian was but the rod of his anger, Isa 10:5. It was the Lord that rejected the seed of Israel, else their enemies could not have seized upon them, v. 20. Who gave Jacob for a spoil and Israel to the robbers? Did not the Lord? Isa 43:24. We lose the benefit of national judgments if we do not eye the hand of God in them, and the fulfilling of the scripture, for that also is taken notice of here, v. 23. The Lord removed Israel out of his favor, and out of their own land, as he had said by all his servants the prophets. Rather shall heaven and earth pass than one tittle of God's word fall to the ground. When God's word and his works are compared, it will be found not only that they agree, but that they illustrate each other. But why would God ruin a people that were raised and incorporated, as Israel was, by miracles and oracles? Why would he undo that which he himself had done at so vast an expense? Was it purely an act of sovereignty? No, it was an act of necessary justice. For 2. They provoked him to do this by their wickedness. Was it God's doing? Nay, it was their own. By their way and their doings they procured all this to themselves, and it was their own wickedness that did correct them. This the sacred historian shows here at large, that it might appear that God did them no wrong, and that others might hear and fear. Come and see what it was that did all this mischief, that broke their power and laid their honor in the dust. It was sin, that, and nothing else, separated between them and God. This is here very movingly laid open as the cause of all the desolations of Israel. He here shows, what God had done for Israel to engage them to serve him. 1. He gave them their liberty. 7. He brought them from under the hand of Pharaoh who oppressed them, asserted their freedom, Israel is my son, and effected their freedom with a high hand. Thus they were bound in duty and gratitude to be his servants, for he had loosed their bonds. Nor would he that rescued them out of the hand of the king of Egypt have contradicted himself so far as to deliver them into the hand of the king of Assyria, as he did, if they had not, by their iniquity, betrayed their liberty and sold themselves. 2. He gave them their law and was himself their king. They were immediately under a divine regimen. They could not plead ignorance of good and evil, sin and duty, for God had particularly charged them against those very things which here he charges them with. 15. That they should not do like the heathen. Nor could they be in any doubt concerning their obligation to observe the laws which they are here charged with rejecting, for they were the commandments and statutes of the Lord their God. 13. So that no room was left to dispute whether they should keep them or no. He had not dealt so with other nations. PS 147:19-20. 3. He gave them their land, for he cast out the heathen from before them. 8. To make room for them, and the casting out of them for their idolatries was as fair a warning as could be given to Israel not to do like them. 2. What they had done against God, notwithstanding these engagements which he had laid upon them. 1. In general, they sinned against the Lord their God. 7. They did those things that were not right. 9. But secretly. So wedded were they to their evil practices that when they could not do them publicly, could not for shame, or could not for fear, they would do them secretly, an evidence of their atheism, that they thought what was done in secret was from under the eye of God himself and would not be required. Again, they wrought wicked things in such a direct contradiction to the divine law that they seemed as if they were done on purpose to provoke the Lord to anger. 11. In contempt of his authority and defiance of his justice. They rejected God's statutes and his covenant. 15. Would not be bound up either by his command or the consent they themselves had given to the covenant, but threw off the obligations of both, and therefore God justly rejected them. 20. See Host 4:6. They left all the commandments of the Lord their God. 16. Left the way, left the work, which those commandments prescribed them and directed them in. Nay, lastly, they sold themselves to do evil in the sight of the Lord. That is, they wholly addicted themselves to sin, as slaves to the service of those to whom they are sold, and, by their obstinately persisting in sin, so hardened their own hearts that at length it had become morally impossible for them to recover themselves, as one that has sold himself has put his liberty past recall. 2. In particular, though they were guilty, no doubt, of many immoralities, and violated all the commands of the second table, yet nothing is here specified, but their idolatry. This was the sin that did most easily beset them. This was, of all sins, most provoking to God. It was the spiritual adultery that broke the marriage covenant, and was the inlet of all other wickedness. Hence it is again and again mentioned here as the sin that ruined them. 1. They feared other gods. 7. That is, worshipped them and paid their homage to them, as if they feared their displeasure. 2. They walked in the statutes of the heathen, which were contrary to God's statutes. 8. Did as did the heathen. 11. Went after the heathen that were round about them. 15. So prostituting the honor of their peculiarity, and defeating God's design concerning them, which was that they should be distinguished from the heathen. Must those that were taught of God go to school to the heathen? Those that were appropriated to God take their measures from the nations that were abandoned by him? 3. They walked in the statutes of the idolatrous kings of Israel. 8. In all the sins of Jeroboam. 22. When their kings assumed a power to alter and add to the divine institutions they submitted to them, and thought the command of their kings would bear them out in disobedience to the command of their God. 4. They built themselves high places in all their cities. 9. If in any place there was but the tower of the watchman, a country tower that had no walls, but only a tower to shelter the watch in time of danger, or but a lodge for shepherds, it must be honored with a high place, and that with an altar. If there was a fenced city, it must be further fortified with a high place. Having forsaken God's only place, they knew no end of high places, in which every man followed his own fancy and directed his devotion to what God he pleased. Sacred things were hereby profaned and laid common, when their altars were as heaps in the furrows of the field. Hos 12:11. 5. They set them up images and groves, ashrim, even wooden images, so some think the term, which we translate groves, should be rendered, or Ashtaroth, so others, directed contrary to the second commandment. V. 10. They served idols. V. 12. The works of their own hands and creatures of their own fancy, though God had warned them particularly not to do this thing. 6. They burned incense in all the high places to the honor of strange gods, for it was to the dishonor of the true God. V. 11. 7. They followed vanity. Idols are called so because they could do neither good nor evil, but were the most insignificant things that could be. Those that worshipped them were like unto them, and so they became vain and good for nothing. V. 16. Vain in their devotions, which were brutish and ridiculous, and so became vain in their whole conversation. 8. Besides the molten images, even the two calves, they worshipped all the host of heaven, the sun, moon, and stars, for it is not meant of the heavenly host of angels. They could not rise so far above sensible things as to think of them. And withal, they served Baal, the deified heroes of the Gentiles. V. 16. 9. They caused their children to pass through the fire, in token of their dedicating them to their idols. 10. They used divinations and enchantments, that they might receive directions from the gods to whom they paid their devotions. 3. What means God used with them to bring them off from their idolatries, and to how little purpose. He testified against them, showed them their sins, and warned them of the fatal consequences of them by all the prophets and all the seers, for so the prophets had been formerly called, and pressed them to turn from their evil ways. V. 13. We have read of prophets, more or less, in every reign. Though they had forsaken God's family of priests, he did not leave them without a succession of prophets, who made it their business to teach them the good knowledge of the Lord, but all in vain. V. 14. They would not hear, but hardened their necks, persisted in their idolatries, and were like their fathers, that would not bow their necks to God's yoke, because they did not believe in him, did not receive his truths, nor would venture upon his promises. It seems to refer to their fathers in the wilderness. The same sin that kept them out of Canaan turned these out, and that was unbelief. 4. How God punished them for their sins. He was very angry with them. V. 18. 4. In the matter of his worship, he is a jealous God, and resents nothing more deeply than giving that honor to any creature which is due to himself only. He afflicted them. V. 20. And delivered them into the hand of spoilers, in the days of the judges and of Saul, and afterwards in the days of most of their kings, to see if they would be awakened by the judgments of God to consider and amend their ways. But when all these corrections did not prevail to drive out the folly, God first rent Israel from the house of David, under which they might have been happy. As Judah was hereby weakened, so Israel was hereby corrupted. For they made a man king who drove them from following the Lord, and caused them to sin a great sin. V. 21. This was a national judgment, and the punishment of their former idolatries, and at length he removed them quite out of his sight. V. 18, 23, without giving them any hopes of a return out of their captivity. Lastly, here is a complaint against Judah in the midst of all. V. 19. Also Judah kept not the commandments of God, though they were not as yet quite so bad as Israel, yet they walked in the statutes of Israel, and this aggravated the sin of Israel, that they communicated the infection of it to Judah. See Ezek 23:11. Those that bring sin into a country or family bring a plague into it, and will have to answer for all the mischief that follows. The Samaritans' idolatry, 720 BC. 24. And the king of Assyria brought men from Babylon, and from Cutha, and from Ava, and from Hamath, and from Sepharvaim, and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the children of Israel, and they possessed Samaria, and dwelt in the cities thereof. 25 And so it was at the beginning of their dwelling there, that they feared not the Lord. Therefore the Lord sent lions among them, which slew some of them. 26 Wherefore they spake to the king of Assyria, saying, The nations which thou hast removed, and placed in the cities of Samaria, know not the manner of the God of the land. Therefore he hath sent lions among them, and, behold, they slay them, because they know not the manner of the God of the land. 27 Then the king of Assyria commanded, saying, Carry thither one of the priests whom ye brought from thence, and let them go and dwell there, and let him teach them the manner of the God of the land. 28 Then one of the priests whom they had carried away from Samaria came and dwelt in Bethel, and taught them how they should fear the Lord. 29 Howbeit every nation made gods of their own, and put them in the houses of the high places which the Samaritans had made, every nation in their cities wherein they dwelt. 30 And the men of Babylon made Sukkot-Banoth, and the men of Cuth made Nergal, and the men of Hamath made Ashima. 31 And the Avites made Nibas and Tartak, and the Sepharvites burnt their children in fire to Adramelech and Anamelech, the gods of Sepharvaim. 32 So they feared the Lord, and made unto themselves of the lowest of them priests of the high places, which sacrificed for them in the houses of the high places. 33 They feared the Lord, and served their own gods, after the manner of the nations whom they carried away from thence. 34 Unto this day they do after the former manners. They fear not the Lord, neither do they after their statutes, or after their ordinances, or after the law and commandment which the Lord commanded the children of Jacob, whom he named Israel. 35 With whom the Lord had made a covenant, and charged them, saying, Ye shall not fear other gods, nor bow yourselves to them, nor serve them, nor sacrifice to them. 36 But the Lord, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt with great power and a stretched out arm, him shall ye fear, and him shall ye worship, and to him shall ye do sacrifice. 37 And the statutes, and the ordinances, and the law, and the commandment, which he wrote for you, ye shall observe to do for evermore, and ye shall not fear other gods. 38 And the covenant that I have made with you ye shall not forget, neither shall you fear other gods. 39 But the Lord your God ye shall fear, and he shall deliver you out of the hand of all your enemies. 40 Howbeit they did not hearken, but they did after their former manner. 41 So these nations feared the Lord, and served their graven images, both their children and their children's children, as did their fathers, so do they unto this day. Never was land lost, we say, for want of an heir. When the children of Israel were dispossessed, and turned out of Canaan, the king of Assyria soon transplanted thither the supernumeraries of his own country, such as it could well spare, who should be servants to him and masters to the Israelites that remained. And here we have an account of these new inhabitants, whose story is related here that we may take our leave of Samaria, as also of the Israelites that were carried captive into Assyria. Aye, concerning the Assyrians that were brought into the land of Israel we are here told, 1. That they possessed Samaria and dwelt in the cities thereof, v. 24. It is common for lands to change their owners, but sad that the Holy Land should become a heathen land again. See what work sin makes. 2. That at their first coming God sent lions among them. They were probably insufficient to people the country, which occasioned the beasts of the field to multiply against them. Exodus 23:29. Yet, besides the natural cause, there was a manifest hand of God in it, who is Lord of hosts, of all the creatures, and can serve his own purposes by which he pleases, small or great, lice or lions. God ordered them this rough welcome to check their pride and insolence, and to let them know that though they had conquered Israel, the God of Israel had power enough to deal with them, that he could have prevented their settling here, by ordering lions into the service of Israel, and that he permitted it, not for their righteousness, but the wickedness of his own people, and that they were now under his visitation. They had lived without God in their own land, and were not plagued with lions. But if they do so in this land, it is at their peril. 3. That they sent a remonstrance of this grievance to the king their master, setting forth, it is likely, the loss their infant colony had sustained by the lions, and the continual fear they were in of them, and stating that they looked upon it to be a judgment upon them for not worshipping the God of the land, which they could not, because they knew not how. V. 26. The God of Israel was the God of the whole world, but they ignorantly call him the God of the land, apprehending themselves therefore within his reach, and concerned to be upon good terms with him. Herein they shamed the Israelites, who were not so ready to hear the voice of God's judgments as they were, and who had not served the God of that land, though he was the God of their fathers and their great benefactor, and though they were well instructed in the manner of his worship. Assyrians begged to be taught that which Israelites hated to be taught. 4. That the king of Assyria took care to have them taught the manner of the God of the land. V. 27, 28. Not out of any affection to that God, but to save his subjects from the lions. On this errand he sent back one of the priests whom he had carried away captive. A prophet would have done them more good, for this was but one of the priests of the calves, and therefore chose to dwell at Bethel for old acquaintance' sake, and, though he might teach them to do better than they did, he was not likely to teach them to do well, unless he had taught his own people better. However, he came and dwelled among them to teach them how they should fear the Lord. Whether he taught them out of the book of the law, or only by word of mouth, is uncertain. 5. That, being thus taught, they made a mongrel religion of it, worshipped the God of Israel for fear and their own idols for love. V. 33. They feared the Lord, but they served their own gods. They all agreed to worship the God of the land according to the manner, to serve the Jewish festivals and rites of sacrificing, but every nation made gods of their own besides, not only for their private use in their own families, but to be put in the houses of their high places. V. 9. The idols of each country are here named. V. 30, 31. The learned are at a loss for the signification of several of these names, and cannot agree by what representations these gods were worshipped. If we may credit the traditions of the Jewish doctors, they tell us that Sukkot was worshipped in a hen and chickens, Nergal in a cock, a Shema in a smooth goat, Nibas in a dog, Tartak in an ass, a Dramelech in a peacock, a Namelech in a pheasant. Our own tell us, more probably, that Sukkot, signifying the tents of the daughters, was Venus. Nergal, being worshipped by the Cuthites or Persians, was the fire. A Dramelech and a Namelech were only distinctions of Moloch. See how vain idolaters were in their imaginations, and wonder at their sottishness. Our very ignorance concerning these idols teaches us the accomplishment of that word which God has spoken, that these false gods should all perish. Jah 10:11. They are all buried in oblivion, while the name of the true God shall continue forever. 6. This medley superstition is here said to continue unto this day. V. 41. Till the time when this book was written, and long after, above 300 years in all, till the time of Alexander the Great, when Menes, brother to Jadis the high priest of the Jews, having married the daughter of Sanballat, governor of the Samaritans, went over to them, got leave of Alexander to build a temple in Mount Gerizim, drew over many of the Jews to him, and prevailed with the Samaritans to cast away all their idols and to worship the God of Israel only. Yet their worship was mixed, with so much superstition that our Savior told them they knew not what they worshipped. John 4:22. 2. Concerning the Israelites that were carried into the land of Assyria. This historian has occasion to speak of them. V. 22. Showing that their successors in the land did as they had done, after the manner of the nations whom they carried away. They worshipped both the God of Israel and those other gods. But what did the captives do in the land of their affliction? Were they reformed and brought to repentance by their troubles? No, they did after the former manner. V. 34. When the two tribes were afterwards carried into Babylon, they were cured by it of their idolatry, and therefore, after 70 years, they were brought back with joy. But the 10 tribes were hardened in the furnace, and therefore were justly lost in it and left to perish. This obstinacy of theirs is here aggravated by the consideration 1. of the honor God had put upon them as the seed of Jacob, whom he named Israel, and from him they were so named, but were a reproach to that worthy name by which they were called. 2. Of the covenant he made with them, and the charge he gave them upon that covenant, which is here very fully recited, that they should fear and serve the Lord Jehovah only, who had brought them up out of Egypt. V. 36. That, having received his statutes and ordinances in writing, they should observe to do them for evermore. V. 37. And never forget that covenant which God had made with them, the promises and conditions of that covenant, especially that great article of it which is here thrice repeated, because it had been so often inculcated and so much insisted on that they should not fear other gods. He had told them that, if they kept close to him, he would deliver them out of the hand of all their enemies. V. 39. Yet when they were in the hand of their enemies and stood in need of deliverance, they were so stupid and had so little sense of their own interest that they did after the former manner. V. 40. They served both the true God and false gods, as if they knew no difference. Ephraim is joined to idols, let him alone. So they did, and so did the nations that succeeded them. Well might the apostle ask, what then, are we better than they? No, in no wise, for both Jews and Gentiles are all under sin. Rom 3:9. Chapter 18, when the prophet had condemned Ephraim for lies and deceit, he comforted himself with this, that Judah yet ruled with God, and was faithful with the Most Holy. Hos 11:12. It was a very melancholy view which the last chapter gave us of the desolations of Israel, but this chapter shows us the affairs of Judah in a good posture at the same time, that it may appear God has not quite cast off the seed of Abraham. Rom 11:1. Hezekiah is here upon the throne, reforming his kingdom, ver 1-6. 2. Prospering in all his undertakings, version 7, 8, and this at the same time when the 10 tribes were led captive, ver 9-12. 3. Yet invaded by Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, version 13. 1. His country put under contribution, ver 14-16. 2. Jerusalem besieged, version 17. 3. God blasphemed, himself reviled, and his people solicited to revolt, in a virulent speech made by Rabshakeh, ver 18-37. But how well it ended, and how much to the honor and comfort of our great reformer, we shall find in the next chapter. Hezekiah's good reign, 726 BC. 1. Now it came to pass in the 3rd year of Hohi son of Elah king of Israel, that Hezekiah the son of Ahaz king of Judah began to reign. 225 years old was he when he began to reign, and he reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name also was Abi, the daughter of Zechariah. 3. And he did that which was right in the sight of the Lord, according to all that David his father did. For he removed the high places, and brake the images, and cut down the groves, and brake in pieces the brazen serpent that Moses had made. For unto those days the children of Israel did burn incense to it, and he called it Nehushtan. 5. He trusted in the Lord God of Israel, so that after him was none like him among all the kings of Judah, nor any that were before him. 6. For he clave to the Lord, and departed not from following him, but kept his commandments, which the Lord commanded Moses. 7. And the Lord was with him, and he prospered whithersoever he went forth, and he rebelled against the king of Assyria, and served him not. 8. He smote the Philistines, even unto Gaza, and the borders thereof, from the tower of the watchman to the fenced city. We have here a general account of the reign of Hezekiah. It appears, by comparing his age with his father's, that he was born when his father was about 11 or 12 years old, divine providence so ordering that he might be of full age, and fit for business, when the measure of his father's iniquity should be full. Here is his great piety, which was the more wonderful because his father was very wicked and vile, one of the worst of the kings, yet he was one of the best, which may intimate to us that what good there is in any is not of nature, but of grace, free grace. Sovereign grace, which, contrary to nature, grafts into the good olive that which was wild by nature, Rom 11:24, and also that grace gets over the greatest difficulties and disadvantages. Ahaz, it is likely, gave his son a bad education as well as a bad example. Uriah his priest perhaps had the tuition of him. His attendants and companions, we may suppose, were such as were addicted to idolatry, and yet Hezekiah became eminently good. When God's grace will work, what can hinder it? 1. He was a genuine son of David, who had a great many degenerate ones. 3. He did that which was right, according to all that David his father did, with whom the covenant was made, and therefore he was entitled to the benefit of it. We have read of some of them who did that which was right, but not like David, ch. 14:3. They did not love God's ordinances, nor cleave to them, as he did. But Hezekiah was a second David, had such a love for God's word, and God's house as he had. Let us not be frightened with an apprehension of the continual decay of virtue, as if, when times and men are bad, they must needs, of course, grow worse and worse. That does not follow, for, after many bad kings, God raised up one that was like David himself. 2. He was a zealous reformer of his kingdom, and as we find, 2 Chron 29:3, he began betimes to be so, fell to work as soon as ever he came to the crown, and lost no time. He found his kingdom very corrupt, the people in all things too superstitious. They had always been so, but in the last reign worse than ever. By the influence of his wicked father, a deluge of idolatry had overspread the land. His spirit was stirred against this idolatry, we may suppose, as Paul's at Athens, while his father lived, and therefore, as soon as ever he had power in his hands, he set himself to abolish it. 4. Though, considering how the people were wedded to it, he might think it could not be done without opposition. 1. The images and the groves were downright idolatrous and of heathenish original. These he broke and destroyed. Though his own father had set them up and shown an affection for them, yet he would not protect them. We must never dishonor God in honor to our earthly parents. 2. The high places, though they had sometimes been used by the prophets upon special occasions and had been hitherto connived at by the good kings, were nevertheless an affront to the temple and a breach of the law which required them to worship there only, and, being from under the inspection of the priests, gave opportunity for the introducing of idolatrous usages. Hezekiah, therefore, who made God's word his rule, not the example of his predecessors, removed them, made a law for the removal of them, the demolishing of the chapels, tabernacles, and altars there erected, and the suppressing of the use of them, which law was put in execution with vigor, and, it is probable, the terrible judgments which the kingdom of Israel was now under for their idolatry made Hezekiah the more zealous, and the people the more willing to comply with him. It is well when our neighbor's harms are our warnings. 3. The brazen serpent was originally of divine institution, and yet, because it had been abused to idolatry, he broke it to pieces. The children of Israel had brought that with them to Canaan. Where they set it up we are not told, but, it seems, it had been carefully preserved. As a memorial of God's goodness to their fathers in the wilderness and a traditional evidence of the truth of that story, number 21:9, for the encouragement of the sick to apply to God for a cure and of penitent sinners to apply to him for mercy. But in process of time, when they began to worship the creature more than the Creator, those that would not worship images borrowed from the heathen, as some of their neighbors did, were drawn in by the tempter to burn incense to the brazen serpent, because that was made by order from God himself and had been an instrument of good to them. But Hezekiah, in his pious zeal for God's honor, not only forbade the people to worship it, but that it might never be so abused anymore, he showed the people that it was Nehushtan, nothing else but a piece of brass, and that therefore it was an idle wicked thing to burn incense to it. He then broke it to pieces, that is, as Bishop Patrick expounds it, ground it to powder, which he scattered in the air, that no fragment of it might remain. If any think that the just honor of the brazen serpent was hereby diminished, they will find it abundantly made up again. John 3:14, where our Savior makes it a type of himself. Good things, when idolized, are better parted with than kept. 3. Herein he was a none such. B. 5. None of all the kings of Judah were like him, either before or after him. 2 things he was eminent for in his reformation. 1. Courage and confidence in God. In abolishing idolatry, there was danger of disobliging his subjects and provoking them to rebel, but he trusted in the Lord God of Israel to bear him out in what he did and save him from harm. A firm belief of God's all-sufficiency to protect and reward us will conduce much to make us sincere, bold, and vigorous in the way of our duty, like Hezekiah. When he came to the crown, he found his kingdom compassed with enemies, but he did not seek for succor to foreign aids, as his father did, but trusted in the God of Israel to be the keeper of Israel. 2. Constancy and perseverance in his duty. For this there was none like him, that he clave to the Lord with a fixed resolution and never departed from following him. V. 6. Some of his predecessors that began well fell off, but he, like Caleb, followed the Lord fully. He not only abolished all idolatrous usages, but kept God's commandments, and in everything made conscience of his duty. 2. His great prosperity. V. 7, 8. He was with God, and then God was with him, and, having the special presence of God with him, he prospered whithersoever he went, had wonderful success in all his enterprises, in his wars, his buildings, and especially his reformation. For that good work was carried on with less difficulty than he could have expected. Those that do God's work with an eye to his glory, and with confidence in his strength, may expect to prosper in it. Great is the truth and will prevail. Finding himself successful. 1. He threw off the yoke of the king of Assyria, which his father had basely submitted to. This is called rebelling against him, because so the king of Assyria called it, but it was really an asserting of the just rights of his crown, which it was not in the power of Ahaz to alienate. If it was imprudent to make this bold struggle so soon, yet I see not that it was, as some think, unjust. When he had thrown out the idolatry of the nations, he might well throw off the yoke of their oppression. The surest way to liberty is to serve God. 2. He made a vigorous attack upon the Philistines, and smote them even unto Gaza, both the country villages and the fortified town, the tower of the watchmen and the fenced cities, reducing those places which they had made themselves masters of in his father's time. 2 Chron 28:18. When he had purged out the corruptions his father had brought in, he might expect to recover the possessions his father had lost. Of his victories over the Philistines Isaiah prophesied, Isa 14:28, etc. Sennacherib invades Judea, 726 BC. 9. And it came to pass in the 4th year of King Hezekiah, which was the 7th year of Hohi son of Elah king of Israel, that Shalmaneser king of Assyria came up against Samaria and besieged it. 10. And at the end of 3 years they took it, even in the 6th year of Hezekiah, that is the 9th year of Hohi king of Israel, Samaria was taken. 11. And the king of Assyria did carry away Israel unto Assyria, and put them in Hala and in Habor by the river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes. 12. Because they obeyed not the voice of the Lord their God, but transgressed his covenant, and all that Moses the servant of the Lord commanded, and would not hear them, nor do them. 13. Now in the 14th year of King Hezekiah did Sennacherib king of Assyria come up against all the fenced cities of Judah, and took them. 14. And Hezekiah king of Judah sent to the king of Assyria to Lachish, saying, I have offended. Return from me. That which thou pitiest on me will I bear. And the king of Assyria appointed unto Hezekiah king of Judah 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. 15. And Hezekiah gave him all the silver that was found in the house of the Lord, and in the treasures of the king's house. 16. At that time did Hezekiah cut off the gold from the doors of the temple of the Lord, and from the pillars which Hezekiah king of Judah had overlaid, and gave it to the king of Assyria. The kingdom of Assyria had now grown considerable, though we never read of it till the last reign. Such changes there are in the affairs of nations and families. Those that have been despicable become formidable, and those, on the contrary, are brought low that have made a great noise and figure. We have here an account of the success of Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, against Israel, his besieging Samaria, v. 9, taking it, v. 10, and carrying the people into captivity, v. 11, with the reason why God brought this judgment upon them, v. 12, because they obeyed not the voice of the Lord their God. This was related more largely in the foregoing chapter, but it is here repeated, 1. As that which stirred up Hezekiah and his people to purge out idolatry with so much zeal, because they saw the ruin which it brought upon Israel. When their neighbor's house was on fire and their own in danger, it was time to cast away the accursed thing. 2. As that which Hezekiah much lamented, but had not strength to prevent. Though the 10 tribes had revolted from, and often been vexatious to, the house of David, no longer ago than in his father's reign, yet being of the seed of Israel, he could not be glad at their calamities. 3. As that which laid Hezekiah and his kingdom open to the king of Assyria, and made it much more easy for him to invade the land. It is said of the 10 tribes here that they would neither hear God's commandments nor do them, v. 12. Many will be content to give God the hearing that will give him no more, Ezek 33:31, but these, being resolved not to do their duty, did not care to hear of it. 2. Of the attempt of Sennacherib, the succeeding king of Assyria, against Judah, in which he was encouraged by his predecessor's success against Israel, whose honors he would vie with and whose victories he would push forward. The descent he made upon Judah was a great calamity to that kingdom, by which God would try the faith of Hezekiah and chastise the people, who are called a hypocritical nation, Isa 10:6, because they did not comply with Hezekiah's reformation, nor willingly part with their idols, but kept them up in their hearts, and perhaps in their houses, though their high places were removed. Even times of reformation may prove troublesome times, made so by those that oppose it, and then the blame is laid upon the reformers. This calamity will appear great upon Hezekiah if we consider 1. How much he lost of his country, v. 13. The king of Assyria took all or most of the fenced cities of Judah, the frontier towns and the garrisons, and then all the rest fell into his hands, of course. The confusion which the country was put into by this invasion is described by the prophet, Isa 10:28-31. 2. How dearly he paid for his peace. He saw Jerusalem itself in danger of falling into the enemy's hand, as Samaria had done, and was willing to purchase its safety at the expense, 1. Of a mean submission. I have offended in denying the usual tribute, and am ready to make satisfaction as shall be demanded, v. 14. Where was Hezekiah's courage? Where his confidence in God? Why did he not advise with Isaiah before he sent this crouching message? 2. Of a vast sum of money, 300 talents of silver and 30 of gold, above 200, 000 L, not to be paid annually, but as a present ransom. To raise the sum, he was forced not only to empty the public treasures, v. 15, but to take the golden plates off from the doors of the temple, and from the pillars, v. 16. Though the temple sanctified the gold which he had dedicated, yet, the necessity being urgent, he thought he might make as bold with that as his father David, whom he took for his pattern, did with the showbread, and that it was neither impious nor imprudent to give a part for the preservation of the whole. His father has had plundered the temple in contempt of it, 2 Chron 28:24. He had repaid with interest what his father took, and now, with all due reverence, he only begged leave to borrow it again in an exigency and for a greater good, with a resolution to restore it in full as soon as he should be in a capacity to do so. Rabshakeh's blasphemous speech, 710 BC. 17. And the king of Assyria sent Tartan and Rapsaris and Rabshakeh from Lachish to King Hezekiah with a great host against Jerusalem. And they went up and came to Jerusalem. And when they were come up, they came and stood by the conduit of the upper pool, which is in the highway of the fuller's field. 18. And when they had called to the king, there came out to them Eliakim the son of Hilkiah, which was over the household, and Shebna the scribe, and Joah the son of Asaph the recorder. 19. And Rabshakeh said unto them, Speak ye now to Hezekiah, Thus saith the great king, the king of Assyria, What confidence is this wherein thou trustest? 20. Thou sayest, but they are but vain words. I have counsel and strength for the war. Now on whom dost thou trust, that thou rebellest against me? 21. Now, behold, thou trustest upon the staff of this bruised reed, even upon Egypt, on which if a man lean, it will go into his hand, and pierce it. So is Pharaoh king of Egypt unto all that trust on him. 22. But if ye say unto me, We trust in the Lord our God, is not that he, whose high places and whose altars Hezekiah hath taken away, and hath said to Judah and Jerusalem, Ye shall worship before this altar in Jerusalem? 23. Now therefore, I pray thee, give pledges to my lord the king of Assyria, and I will deliver thee 2,000 horses, if thou be able on thy part to set riders upon them. 24. How then wilt thou turn away the face of one captain of the least of my master's servants, and put thy trust on Egypt for chariots and for horsemen? 25. Am I now come up without the Lord against this place to destroy it? The Lord said to me, Go up against this land and destroy it. 26. Then said Eliakim the son of Hilkiah, and Shebna, and Joah unto Rabshakeh, Speak, I pray thee, to thy servants in the Syrian language, for we understand it. And talk not with us in the Jews' language in the ears of the people that are on the wall. 27. But Rabshakeh said unto them, Hath my master sent me to thy master, and to thee, to speak these words? Hath he not sent me to the men which sit on the wall, that they may eat their own dung, and drink their own piss with you? 28. Then Rabshakeh stood and cried with a loud voice in the Jews' language, and spake, saying, Hear the word of the great king, the king of Assyria. 29. Thus saith the king, Let not Hezekiah deceive you, for he shall not be able to deliver you out of his hand. 30. Neither let Hezekiah make you trust in the Lord, saying, The Lord will surely deliver us, and this city shall not be delivered into the hand of the king of Assyria. 31. Hearken not to Hezekiah, for thus saith the king of Assyria, Make an agreement with me by a present, and come out to me, and then eat ye every man of his own vine, and every one of his fig tree, and drink ye every one the waters of his cistern. 32. Until I come and take you away to a land like your own land, a land of corn and wine, a land of bread and vineyards, a land of oil, olive, and of honey, that ye may live, and not die, and hearken not unto Hezekiah, when he persuadeth you, saying, The Lord will deliver us. 33. Hath any of the gods of the nations delivered at all his land out of the hand of the king of Assyria? 34. Where are the gods of Hamath and of Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim, Hena, and Iva? Have they delivered Samaria out of mine hand? 35. Who are they among all the gods of the countries, that have delivered their country out of mine hand, that the Lord should deliver Jerusalem out of mine hand? 36. But the people held their peace, and answered him not a word, for the king's commandment was, saying, Answer him not. 37. Then came Eliakim the son of Hilkiah, which was over the household, and Shebna the scribe, and Joah the son of Asaph the recorder, to Hezekiah with their clothes rent, and told him the words of Rabshakeh. Here is, Jerusalem besieged by Sennacherib's army, v. 17. He sent 3 of his great generals with a great host against Jerusalem. Is this the great king, the king of Assyria? No, never call him so. He is a base, false, perfidious man, and worthy to be made infamous to all ages. Let him never be named with honor that could do such a dishonorable thing as this, to take Hezekiah's money, which he gave him upon condition he should withdraw his army, and then, instead of quitting his country according to the agreement, to advance against his capital city, and not send him his money again either. Those are wicked men indeed, and let them be ever so great, we will call them so, whose principle it is not to make their promises binding any further than is for their interest. Now Hezekiah had too much reason to repent his treaty with Sennacherib, which made him much the poorer and never the safer. 2. Hezekiah and his princes and people, railed upon by Rabshakeh, the chief speaker of the 3 generals, and one that had the most satirical genius. He was no doubt instructed what to say by Sennacherib, who intended hereby to pick a new quarrel with Hezekiah. He had promised, upon the receipt of Hezekiah's money, to withdraw his army, and therefore could not for shame make a forcible attack upon Jerusalem immediately. But he sent Rabshakeh to persuade Hezekiah to surrender it, and, if he should refuse, the refusal would serve him for a pretense, and a very poor one, to besiege it, and, if it hold out, to take it by storm. Rabshakeh had the impudence to desire audience of the king himself at the conduit of the upper pool, without the walls, but Hezekiah had the prudence to decline a personal treaty and sent 3 commissioners, the prime ministers of state, to hear what he had to say, but with a charge to them not to answer that fool according to his folly. V. 36. For they could not convince him, but would certainly provoke him, and Hezekiah had learned of his father David to believe that God would hear when he, as a deaf man, heard not. PS 38:13-15. One interruption they gave him in his discourse, which was only to desire that he would speak to them now in the Syrian language, and they would consider what he said and report it to the king, and, if they did not give him a satisfactory answer, then he might appeal to the people by speaking in the Jews' language. V. 26. This was a reasonable request, and agreeable to the custom of treaties, which is that the plenipotentiaries should settle matters between themselves before anything be made public. But Hilkiah did not consider what an unreasonable man he had to deal with. Else he would not have made this request, for it did but exasperate Rabshakeh, and make him the more rude and boisterous. V. 27. Against all the rules of decency and honor, instead of treating with the commissioners, he menaces the soldiery, persuades them to desert or mutiny, threatens if they hold out to reduce them to the last extremities of famine, and then goes on with his discourse, the scope of which is to persuade Hezekiah and his princes and people to surrender the city. Observe how, in order to do this, 1. He magnifies his master the king of Assyria. Once and again he calls him that great king, the king of Assyria. V. 19:28. What an idol did he make of that prince whose creature he was? God is the great king, but Sennacherib was in his eye a little god, and he would possess them with the same veneration for him that he had, and thereby frighten them into a submission to him. But to those who by faith see the King of Kings in his power and glory, even the king of Assyria looks mean and little. What are the greatest of men when either they come to compare with God or God comes to contend with them? PS 82:6-7. 2. He endeavors to make them believe that it will be much for their advantage to surrender. If they held out, they must expect no other than to eat their own dung, by reason of the want of provisions, which would be entirely cut off from them by the besiegers. But if they would capitulate, seek his favor with a present, and cast themselves upon his mercy, he would give them very good treatment. V. 31. I wonder with what face Rabshakeh could speak of making an agreement with a present when his master had so lately broken the agreement Hezekiah made with him with that great present. V. 14. Can those expect to be trusted that have been so grossly perfidious? But ad populum faleras, gild the chain, and the vulgar will let you bind them. He thought to soothe up all with a promise that if they would surrender upon discretion, though they must expect to be prisoners and captives, yet it would really be happy for them to be so. One would wonder he should ever think to prevail by such gross suggestions as these, but that the devil does thus impose upon sinners every day by his temptations. He will needs persuade them, 1. That their imprisonment would be to their advantage, for they should eat every man of his own vine. V. 31. Though the property of their estates would be vested in the conquerors, yet they should have the free use of them. But he does not explain it now to them as he would afterwards, that it must be understood just as much, and just as long, as the conqueror pleases. 2. That their captivity would be much more to their advantage. I will take you away to a land like your own land. And what the better would they be for that, when they must have nothing in it to call their own? 3. That which he aims at especially is to convince them that it is to no purpose for them to stand it out. What confidence is this wherein thou trustest? So he insults over Hezekiah. V. 19. To the people he says, V. 29, let not Hezekiah deceive you into your own ruin, for he shall not be able to deliver you. You must either bend or break. It were well if sinners would submit to the force of this argument, in making their peace with God, that it is therefore our wisdom to yield to him, because it is in vain to contend with him. What confidence is that which those trust in who stand it out against him? Are we stronger than he? Or what shall we get by setting briars and thorns before a consuming fire? But Hezekiah was not so helpless and defenseless as Rabshakeh would here represent him. 3 things he supposes Hezekiah might trust to, and he endeavors to make out the insufficiency of these. 1. His own military preparations. Thou sayest, I have counsel and strength for the war, and we find that so he had. 2 Chron 32:3. But this Rabshakeh turns off with a slight. They are but vain words. Thou art an unequal match for us, v. 20. With the greatest haughtiness and disdain imaginable, he challenges him to produce 2,000 men of all his people that know how to manage a horse, and will venture to give him 2,000 horses if he can. He falsely insinuates that Hezekiah has no men or none fit to be soldiers, v. 23. Thus he thinks to run him down with confidence and banter, and will lay him any wager that one captain of the least of his master's servants is able to baffle him and all his forces. 2. His alliance with Egypt. He supposes that Hezekiah trusts to Egypt for chariots and horsemen, v. 24, because the king of Israel had done so, and of this confidence he truly says, it is a broken reed, v. 21. It will not only fail a man when he leans on it and expects it to bear his weight, but it will run into his hand and pierce it and rend his shoulder, as the prophet further illustrates this similitude with application to Egypt. Ezek 29:6-7. So is the king of Egypt, says he, and truly so had the king of Assyria been to Ahaz, who trusted in him, but he distressed him and strengthened him not. 2 Chron 28:20. Those that trust to any arm of flesh will find it no better than a broken reed, but God is the rock of ages. 3. His interest in God and relation to him. This was indeed the confidence in which Hezekiah trusts, v. 22. He supported himself by depending on the power and promise of God. With this he encouraged himself and his people, v. 30. The Lord will surely deliver us, and again, v. 32. This Rabshakeh was sensible was their great stay, and therefore he was most large in his endeavors to shake this, as David's enemies, who used all the arts they had to drive him from his confidence in God. PS 3:2, 11:1, and thus did Christ's enemies. Matt 27:43. 3 things Rabshakeh suggested to discourage their confidence in God, and they were all false. 1. That Hezekiah had forfeited God's protection and thrown himself out of it by destroying the high places and the altars, v. 22. Here he measures the God of Israel by the gods of the heathen, who delighted in the multitude of altars and temples, and concludes that Hezekiah has given a great offense to the God of Israel in confining his people to one altar. Thus is one of the best deeds he ever did in his life misconstrued as impious and profane by one that did not, or would not, know the law of the God of Israel. If that be represented by ignorant and malicious men as evil and a provocation to God, which is really good and pleasing to him, we must not think it strange. If this was to be sacrilegious, Hezekiah would ever be so. 2. That God had given orders for the destruction of Jerusalem at this time, v. 25. Have I now come up without the Lord? This is all banter and rhodomantade. He did not himself think he had any commission from God to do what he did. By whom should he have it? But he made this pretense to amuse and terrify the people that were on the wall. If he had any color at all for what he said, it might be taken from the notice which perhaps he had had by the writings of the prophets of the hand of God in the destruction of the 10 tribes. And he thought he had as good a warrant for the seizing of Jerusalem as of Samaria. Many that have fought against God have pretended commissions from him. 3. That if Jehovah, the God of Israel, should undertake to protect them from the king of Assyria, yet he was notable to do it. With this blasphemy he concluded his speech, v. 33-35, comparing the God of Israel with the gods of the nations whom he had conquered and putting him upon the level with them, and concluding that because they could not defend and deliver their worshippers, the God of Israel could not defend and deliver his. See here, first, his pride. When he conquered a city, he reckoned himself to have conquered its gods and valued himself mightily upon it. His high opinion of the idols made him have a high opinion of himself as too hard for them. Secondly, his profaneness. The God of Israel was not a local deity, but the God of the whole earth, the only living and true God, the Ancient of Days, and had often proved himself to be above all gods. Yet he makes no more of him than of the upstart fictitious gods of Hamath and Arpad, unfairly arguing that the gods, as some now say the priests, of all religions are the same, and himself above them all. The tradition of the Jews is that Rabshakeh was an apostate Jew, which made him so ready in the Jews' language. If so, his ignorance of the God of Israel was the less excusable, and his enmity the less strange. For apostates are commonly the most bitter and spiteful enemies, witness Julian. A great deal of art and management, it must be owned, there were in this speech of Rabshakeh, but withal, a great deal of pride, malice, falsehood, and blasphemy. One grain of sincerity would have been worth all this wit and rhetoric. Lastly, we are told what the commissioners on Hezekiah's part did. 1. They held their peace, not for want of something to say both on God's behalf and Hezekiah's. They might easily and justly have upbraided him with his master's treachery and breach of faith, and have asked him, "What religion encourages you to hope that such conduct will prosper?" At least they might have given that grave hint which Ahab gave to Ben-Hadad's. Like insolent demands, let not him that girdeth on the harness boast as though he had put it off. But the king had commanded them not to answer him, and they observed their instructions. There is a time to keep silence, as well as a time to speak, and there are those to whom to offer anything religious or rational is to cast pearls before swine. What can be said to a madman? It is probable that their silence made Rabshakeh yet more proud and secure, and so his heart was lifted up and hardened to his destruction. 2. They rent their clothes in detestation of his blasphemy and in grief for the despised, afflicted condition of Jerusalem, the reproach of which was a burden to them. 3. They faithfully reported the matter to the king, their master, and told him the words of Rabshakeh, that he might consider what was to be done, what course they should take, and what answer they should return to Rabshakeh's summons. Chapter 19, Jerusalem's great distress we read of in the foregoing chapter, and left it besieged, insulted, threatened, terrified, and just ready to be swallowed up by the Assyrian army. But in this chapter we have an account of its glorious deliverance, not by sword or bow, but by prayer and prophecy, and by the hand of an angel. I, Hezekiah, in great concern, sent to the prophet Isaiah to desire his prayers, verse 1-5, and received from him an answer of peace, version 6-7. 2. Sennacherib sent a letter to Hezekiah to fright him into a surrender, verse 8-13. 3. Hezekiah thereupon, by a very solemn prayer, recommended his case to God, the righteous judge, and begged help from him, verse 14-19. 4. God, by Isaiah, sent him a very comfortable message, assuring him of deliverance, verse 20-34. The army of the Assyrians was all cut off by an angel, and Sennacherib himself slain by his own sons, verse 35-37. And so God glorified himself and saved his people. Hezekiah sends to Isaiah, 710 BC. 1. And it came to pass, when King Hezekiah heard it, that he rent his clothes, and covered himself with sackcloth, and went into the house of the Lord. 2. And he sent Eliakim, which was over the household, and Shebna the scribe, and the elders of the priests, covered with sackcloth, to Isaiah the prophet the son of Amoz. 3. And they said unto him, Thus saith Hezekiah, This day is a day of trouble, and of rebuke and blasphemy, for the children are come to the birth, and there is not strength to bring forth. For it may be the Lord thy God will hear all the words of Rabshakeh, whom the king of Assyria his master hath sent to reproach the living God, and will reprove the words which the Lord thy God hath heard. Wherefore lift up thy prayer for the remnant that are left. 5. So the servants of King Hezekiah came to Isaiah 6, and Isaiah said unto them, Thus shall ye say to your master, Thus saith the Lord, Be not afraid of the words which thou hast heard, with which the servants of the king of Assyria have blasphemed me. 7. Behold, I will send a blast upon him, and he shall hear a rumor, and shall return to his own land, and I will cause him to fall by the sword in his own land. The contents of Rabshakeh's speech being brought to Hezekiah, one would have expected, and it is likely Rabshakeh did expect, that he would call a council of war, and it would be debated whether it was best to capitulate or no. Before the siege, he had taken counsel with his princes and his mighty men, 2 Chron 32:3. But that would not do now. His greatest relief is that he has a God to go to, and what passed between him and his God on this occasion we have here an account of. Hezekiah discovered a deep concern at the dishonor done to God by Rabshakeh's blasphemy. When he heard it, though at second hand, he rent his clothes and covered himself with sackcloth. V1. Good men were wont to do so when they heard of any reproach cast on God's name, and great men must not think it any disparagement to them to sympathize with the injured honor of the great God. Royal robes are not too good to be rent, nor royal flesh too good to be clothed with sackcloth, in humiliation for indignities done to God, and for the perils and terrors of his Jerusalem. To this God now called, and was displeased with those who were not thus affected. Isa 22:12-14. Behold joy and gladness, slaying oxen and killing sheep, though it was a day of trouble and perplexity in the valley of vision. V5, which refers to this very event. The king was in sackcloth, but many of his subjects were in soft clothing. 2. He went up to the house of the Lord, according to the example of the psalmist, who, when he was grieved at the pride and prosperity of the wicked, went into the sanctuary of God, and there understood their end. PS 73:17. He went to the house of God, to meditate and pray, and get his spirit into a sedate, composed frame, after this agitation. He was not considering what answer to return to Rabshakeh, but refers the matter to God. Thou shalt answer, Lord, for me. Herbert. In the house of the Lord he found a place both of rest and refuge, a treasury, a magazine, a council chamber, and all he needed, all in God. Note, when the church's enemies are very daring and threatening, it is the wisdom and duty of the church's friends to apply to God, appeal to him, and leave their cause with him. 3. He sent to the prophet Isaiah, by honorable messengers, in token of the great respect he had for him, to desire his prayers. V 2-4. Eliakim and Shebna were two of those that had heard the words of Rabshakeh, and were the better able both to acquaint and to affect Isaiah with the case. The elders of the priests were themselves to pray for the people in time of trouble, Joel 2:17, but they must go to engage Isaiah's prayers, because he could pray better and had a better interest in heaven. The messengers were to go in sackcloth, because they were to represent the king, who was so clothed. 1. Their errand to Isaiah was, lift up thy prayer for the remnant that is left, that is, for Judah, which is but a remnant now that the 10 tribes are gone, for Jerusalem, which is but a remnant now that the defenced cities of Judah are taken. Note 1. It is very desirable, and what we should be desirous of when we are in trouble, to have the prayers of our friends for us. In begging to have them, we honor God, we honor prayer, and we honor our brethren. 2. When we desire the prayers of others for us, we must not think we are excused from praying for ourselves. When Hezekiah sent to Isaiah to pray for him, he himself went into the house of the Lord to offer up his own prayers. 3. Those who speak from God to us, we should in a particular manner desire to speak to God for us. He is a prophet, and he shall pray for thee. Gen 27. The great prophet is the great intercessor. 4. Those are likely to prevail with God that lift up their prayers, that is, that lift up their hearts in prayer. 5. When the interests of God's church are brought very low, so that there is but a remnant left, few friends, and those weak and at a loss, then it is time to lift up our prayer for that remnant. 2. Two things are urged to Isaiah, to engage his prayers for them. 1. Their fears of the enemy. V 3. He is insolent and haughty. It is a day of rebuke and blasphemy. We are despised. God is dishonored. Upon this account, it is a day of trouble. Never were such a king and kingdom so trampled on and abused as we are. Our soul is exceedingly filled with the contempt of the proud, and it is a sword in our bones to hear them reproach our confidence in God, and say, where is now your God? And, which is worst of all, we see not which way we can help ourselves and get clear of the reproach. Our cause is good, our people are faithful, but we are quite overpowered with numbers. The children are brought to the birth. Now is the time, the critical moment when, if ever, we must be relieved. One successful blow given to the enemy would accomplish our wishes. But, alas, we are not able to give it. There is not strength to bring forth. Our case is as deplorable and calls for a speedy help as that of a woman in travail that is quite spent with her throes, so that she has not strength to bear the child. Compare with this host 13:13. We are ready to perish. If thou canst do anything, have compassion upon us and help us. 2. Their hopes in God. To him they look, on him they depend, to appear for them. One word from him will turn the scale and save the sinking remnant. If he but reprove the words of Rabshakeh, that is, disprove them, 4. If he undertake to convince and confound the blasphemer, all will be well. And this they trust he will do, not for their merit's sake, but for his own honor's sake, because he has reproached the living God by leveling him with deaf and dumb idols. They have reason to think the issue will be good, for they can interest God in the quarrel. PS 74:22. Arise, O God, plead thy own cause. He is the Lord thy God, say they to Isaiah, thine, whose glory thou art concerned for, and whose favor thou art interested in. He has heard and known the blasphemous words of Rabshakeh, and therefore, it may be, he will hear and rebuke them. We hope he will. Help us with thy prayers to bring the cause before him, and then we are content to leave it with him. 4. God, by Isaiah, sent to Hezekiah. Hezekiah, to assure him that he would glorify himself in the ruin of the Assyrians. Hezekiah sent to Isaiah, not to inquire concerning the event, as many did that sent to the prophets, shall I recover? Or the like, but to desire his assistance in his duty. It was this that he was solicitous about, and therefore God let him know what the event should be, in recompense of his care to do his duty. V. 6, 7. 1. God interested himself in the cause. They have blasphemed me. 2. He encouraged Hezekiah, who was much dismayed. Be not afraid of the words which thou hast heard. They are but words, though swelling and fiery words, and words are but wind. 3. He promised to frighten the king of Assyria worse than Rabshakeh had frightened him. I will send a blast upon him, that pestilential breath which killed his army, upon which terrors shall seize him and drive him into his own country, where death shall meet him. This short threatening from the mouth of God would do execution, when all the impotent menaces that came from Rabshakeh's mouth would vanish into air. Sennacherib sends to Hezekiah, 710 BC. 8. So Rabshakeh returned, and found the king of Assyria warring against Linah, for he had heard that he was departed from Lachish. 9. And when he heard say of Tirhakah king of Ethiopia, behold, he is come out to fight against thee, he sent messengers again unto Hezekiah, saying, 10. Thus shall you speak to Hezekiah king of Judah, saying, let not thy God in whom thou trustest deceive thee, saying, Jerusalem shall not be delivered into the hand of the king of Assyria. 11. Behold, thou hast heard what the kings of Assyria have done to all lands, by destroying them utterly, and shalt thou be delivered? 12. Have the gods of the nations delivered them which my fathers have destroyed, as Gozan, and Haran, and Rezeph, and the children of Eden which were in Thelasar? 13. Where is the king of Hamath, and the king of Arpad, and the king of the city of Sepharvaim, of Hena and Ivah? 14. And Hezekiah received the letter of the hand of the messengers, and read it. And Hezekiah went up into the house of the Lord, and spread it before the Lord. 15. And Hezekiah prayed before the Lord, and said, O Lord God of Israel, which dwellest between the cherubims, thou art the God, even thou alone, of all the kingdoms of the earth. Thou hast made heaven and earth. 16. Lord, bow down thine ear, and hear. Open, Lord, thine eyes, and see, and hear the words of Sennacherib, which hath sent him to reproach the living God. 17. Of a truth, Lord, the kings of Assyria have destroyed the nations and their lands. 18. And have cast their gods into the fire, for they were no gods, but the work of men's hands, wood and stone. Therefore they have destroyed them. 19. Now therefore, O Lord our God, I beseech thee, save thou us out of his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that thou art the Lord God, even thou only. Rabshakeh, having delivered his message and received no answer, whether he took this silence for a consent or a slight does not appear, left his army before Jerusalem, under the command of the other generals, and went himself to attend the king his master for further orders. He found him besieging Libnah, a city that had revolted from Judah, Ch. 8:22. Whether he had taken Lachish or no is not certain. Some think he departed from it because he found the taking of it impracticable, v. 8. However, he was now alarmed with the rumor that the king of the Cushites, who bordered upon the Arabians, was coming out against him with a great army, v. 9. This made him very desirous to gain Jerusalem with all speed. To take it by force would cost him more time and men than he could well spare, and therefore he renewed his attack upon Hezekiah to persuade him tamely to surrender it. Having found him an easy man once, Ch. 18:14, when he said, That which thou puttiest on me I will bear, he hoped again to frighten him into a submission, but in vain. Here, Sennacherib sent a letter to Hezekiah, a railing letter, a blaspheming letter, to persuade him to surrender Jerusalem, because it would be to no purpose for him to think of standing it out. His letter is to the same purport with Rabshakeh's speech. There is nothing new offered in it. Rabshakeh had said to the people, Let not Hezekiah deceive you, Ch. 18:29. Sennacherib writes to Hezekiah, Let not thy God deceive thee, v. 10. Those that have the God of Jacob for their help, and whose hope is in the Lord their God, need not fear being deceived by him, as the heathen were by their gods. To terrify Hezekiah and drive him from his anchor, he magnifies himself and his own achievements. See how proudly he boasts, 1. Of the lands he had conquered, v. 11 all lands, and destroyed utterly. How are the molehills of his victories swelled to mountains? So far was he from destroying all lands that at this time the land of Cush and Tirhakah its king were a terror to him. What vast hyperboles may one expect in proud men's praises of themselves? 2. Of the gods he had conquered, v. 12. Each vanquished nation and its gods, which were so far from being able to deliver them that they fell with them, and shall thy God deliver thee? 3 of the kings he had conquered, v. 13, the king of Hamath and the king of Arpad. Whether he means the prince or the idol, he means to make himself appear greater than either, and therefore very formidable, and the terror of the mighty in the land of the living. 2. Hezekiah encloses this in another letter, a praying letter, a believing letter, and sends it to the King of Kings, who judges among the gods. Hezekiah was not so haughty as not to receive the letter, though we may suppose the superscription did not give him his due titles. When he had received it, he was not so careless as not to read it. When he had read it, he was not in such a passion as to write an answer to it in the same provoking language, but he immediately went up to the temple, presented himself, and then spread the letter before the Lord. v. 14. Not as if God needed to have the letter shown to him. He knew what was in it before Hezekiah did, but hereby he signified that he acknowledged God in all his ways, that he desired not to aggravate the injuries his enemies did him nor to make them appear worse than they were, but desired they might be set in a true light, and that he referred himself to God and his righteous judgment upon the whole matter. Hereby likewise he would effect himself in the prayer he came to the temple to make, and we have need of all possible helps to quicken us in that duty. In the prayer which Hezekiah prayed over this letter, 1. He adores the God whom Sennacherib had blasphemed, v. 15. Calls him the God of Israel, because Israel was his peculiar people, and the God that dwelt between the cherubim, because there was the peculiar residence of his glory upon earth, but he gives glory to him as the God of the whole earth, and not, as Sennacherib fancied him to be, the God of Israel only, and confined to the temple. Let them say what they will, thou art sovereign Lord, for thou art the God of gods, sole Lord, even thou alone, universal Lord of all the kingdoms of the earth, and rightful Lord, for thou hast made heaven and earth. Being creator of all, by an incontestable title thou art owner and ruler of all. 2. He appeals to God concerning the insolence and profaneness of Sennacherib, v. 16, Lord. Here, Lord, see. Here it is under his own hand. Here it is in black and white. Had Hezekiah only been abused, he would have passed it by, but it is God, the living God, that is reproached, the jealous God. Lord, what wilt thou do for thy great name? 3. He owns Sennacherib's triumphs over the gods of the heathen, but distinguishes between them and the God of Israel. v. 17. 18. He has indeed cast their gods into the fire, for they were no gods, unable to help either themselves or their worshippers, and therefore no wonder that he has destroyed them. And, in destroying them, though he knew it not, he really served the justice and jealousy of the God of Israel, who has determined to extirpate all the gods of the heathen. But those are deceived who think they can therefore be too hard for him. He is none of the gods whom men's hands have made, but he has himself made all things. PS 1:15-3, 4. 4. He prays that God will now glorify himself in the defeat of Sennacherib and the deliverance of Jerusalem out of his hands. v. 19. Now therefore save us, for if we be conquered, as other lands are, they will say that thou art conquered, as the gods of those lands were. But, Lord, distinguish thyself by distinguishing us, and let all the world know and be made to confess that thou art the Lord God, the self-existent sovereign God, even thou only, and that all pretenders are vanity and a lie. Note, the best pleas in prayer are those which are taken from God's honor, and therefore the Lord's Prayer begins with hallowed be thy name, and concludes with thine is the glory. Sennacherib's fall predicted, 710 BC. 20. Then Isaiah the son of Amoz sent to Hezekiah, saying, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, that which thou hast prayed to me against Sennacherib king of Assyria I have heard. 21. This is the word that the Lord hath spoken concerning him. The virgin, the daughter of Zion, hath despised thee, and laughed thee to scorn. The daughter of Jerusalem hath shaken her head at thee. 22. Whom hast thou reproached and blasphemed? And against whom hast thou exalted thy voice, and lifted up thine eyes on high? Even against the Holy One of Israel. 23. By thy messengers thou hast reproached the Lord, and hast said, With the multitude of my chariots I am come up to the height of the mountains, to the sides of Lebanon, and will cut down the tall cedar trees thereof, and the choice fir trees thereof. And I will enter into the lodgings of his borders, and into the forest of his Carmel. 24 I have digged and drunk strange waters, and with the sole of my feet have I dried up all the rivers of besieged places. 25 Hast thou not heard long ago how I have done it, and of ancient times that I have formed it? Now have I brought it to pass, that thou shouldest be to lay waste fenced cities into ruinous heaps. 26 Therefore their inhabitants were of small power, they were dismayed and confounded, they were as the grass of the field, and as the green herb, as the grass on the housetops, and as corn blasted before it be grown up. 27 But I know thy abode, and thy going out, and thy coming in, and thy rage against me. 28 Because thy rage against me, and thy tumult is come up into mine ears. Therefore I will put my hook in thy nose, and my bridle in thy lips, and I will turn thee back by the way by which thou camest. 29 And this shall be a sign unto thee, ye shall eat this year such things as grow of themselves, and in the second year that which springeth of the same, and in the third year sow ye, and reap, and plant vineyards, and eat the fruits thereof. 30 And the remnant that is escaped of the house of Judah shall yet again take root downward, and bear fruit upward. 31 For out of Jerusalem shall go forth a remnant, and they that escape out of Mount Zion. The zeal of the Lord of hosts shall do this. 32 Therefore thus saith the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, he shall not come into the city, nor shoot an arrow there, nor come before it with shield, nor cast a bank against it. 33 By the way that he came, by the same shall he return, and shall not come into the city, saith the Lord. 34 For I will defend the city, to save it, for mine own sake, and for my servant David's sake. We have here the gracious, copious answer which God gave to Hezekiah's prayer. The message which he sent him by the same hand. V. 6, 7, one would think, was an answer sufficient to his prayer, but that he might have strong consolation, he was encouraged by two immutable things, in which it was impossible for God to lie. Heb 6:18. In general, God assured him that his prayer was heard, his prayer against Sennacherib, v. 20. Note, the case of those that have the prayers of God's people against them is miserable. For, if the oppressed cry to God against the oppressor, he will hear. Exodus 22:23. God hears and answers, hears with the saving strength of his right hand. PS 26. This message bespeaks two things. Confusion and shame to Sennacherib and his forces. It is here foretold that he should be humbled and broken. The prophet elegantly directs his speech to him, as he does, Isa 10:5. O Assyrian, the rod of my anger. Not that this message was sent to him, but what is here said to him he was made to know by the event. Providence spoke it to him with a witness, and perhaps his own heart was made to whisper this to him. For God has more ways than one of speaking to sinners in his wrath, so as to vex them in his sore displeasure. PS 2:5. Sennacherib is here represented 1. As the scorn of Jerusalem, v. 21. He thought himself the terror of the daughter of Zion, that chaste and beautiful virgin, and that by his threats he could force her to submit to him. But, being a virgin in her father's house and under his protection, she defies thee, despises thee, laughs thee to scorn. Thy impotent malice is ridiculous. He that sits in heaven laughs at thee, and therefore so do those that abide under his shadow. By this word God intended to silence the fears of Hezekiah and his people. Though to an eye of sense the enemy looked formidable, to an eye of faith he looked despicable. 2. As an enemy to God, and that was enough to make him miserable. Hezekiah pleaded this, Lord, he has reproached thee, v. 16. He has, saith God, and I take it as against myself, v. 22. Whom hast thou reproached? Is it not the Holy One of Israel, whose honor is dear to him, and who has power to vindicate it, which the gods of the heathen have not? Nemo me impune laces set. No one shall provoke me with impunity. 3. As a proud vainglorious fool, that spoke great swelling words of vanity, and boasted of a false gift, by his boasts, as well as by his threats, reproaching the Lord. For 1. He magnified his own achievements out of measure, and quite above what really they were. v. 23, 24 thou hast said so and so. This was not in the letter he wrote, but God let Hezekiah know that he not only saw what was written there, but heard what he said elsewhere, probably in the speeches he made to his councils or armies. Note, God takes notice of the boasts of proud men, and will call them to an account, that he may look upon them and abuse them. Job 40:11. What a mighty figure does Sennacherib think he makes, driving his chariots to the tops of the highest mountains, forcing his way through woods and rivers, breaking through all difficulties, making himself master of all he had a mind to. Nothing could stand before him or be withheld from him, no hills too high for him to climb, no trees too strong for him to fell, no waters too deep for him to dry up, as if he had the power of a god, to speak and it is done. 2. He took to himself the glory of doing these great things, whereas they were all the Lord's doing. V. 25:26. Sennacherib, in his letter, had appealed to what Hezekiah had heard. V. 11 Thou hast heard what the kings of Assyria have done. But, in answer to that, he is reminded of what God has done for Israel of old, drying up the Red Sea, leading them through the wilderness, planting them in Canaan. What are all thy doings to these? And as for the desolations thou hast made in the earth, and particularly in Judah, thou art but the instrument in God's hand, a mere tool. It is I that have brought it to pass. I gave thee thy power, gave thee thy success, and made thee what thou art, raised thee up to lay waste fenced cities, and so to punish them for their wickedness, and therefore their inhabitants were of small power. What a foolish, insolent thing was it for him to exalt himself above God, and against God, upon that which he had done by him and under him. Sennacherib's boasts here are expounded in Isa 10:13-14, by the strength of my hand I have done it, and by my wisdom, etc. And they are answered. V. 15. Shall the axe boast itself against him that heweth therewith? It is surely absurd for the fly upon the wheel to say, What a dust do I make? Or for the sword in the hand to say, What execution I do? If God be the principal agent in all that is done, boasting is forever excluded. 4. As under the check and rebuke of that God whom he blasphemed. All his motions were 1. Under the divine cognizance. B. 27. I have thy abode, and what thou dost secretly devise and design, thy going out and coming in, marches and countermarches, and thy rage against me and my people, the tumult of thy passions, the tumult of thy preparations, the noise and bluster thou makest, I know it all. That was more than Hezekiah did, who wished for intelligence of the enemy's motions. But what need was there for this when the eye of God was a constant spy upon him? 2 Chronicles 16:9. 2. Under the divine control. V. 28. I will put my hook in thy nose, thou great Leviathan. Job 41:1. 2. My bridle in thy jaws, thou great behemoth. I will restrain thee, manage thee, turn thee where I please, send thee home like a fool as thou camest, reinfecta, disappointed of thy aim. Note, it is a great comfort to all the church's friends that God has a hook in the nose and a bridle in the jaws of all her enemies, can make even their wrath to serve and praise him, and then restrain the remainder of it. Here shall its proud waves be stayed. 2. Salvation and joy to Hezekiah and his people. This shall be a sign to them of God's favor, and that he is reconciled to them, and his anger is turned away. Isa 12:1. A wonder in their eyes, for so a sign sometimes signifies a token for good, and an earnest of the further mercy God has in store for them, that a good issue shall be put to their present distress in every respect. 1. Provisions were scarce and dear, and what should they do for food? The fruits of the earth were devoured by the Assyrian army. Isa 32:9, 10, etc. Why, they shall not only dwell in the land, but verily they shall be fed. If God save them, he will not starve them, nor let them die by famine, when they have escaped the sword. Eat you this year that which groweth of itself, and you shall find enough of that. Did the Assyrians reap what you sowed? You shall reap what you did not sow. But the next year was the sabbatical year, when the land was to rest, and they must neither sow nor reap. What must they do that year? Why, Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide. God's blessing shall save them seed and labor, And that year too, the voluntary productions of the earth shall serve to maintain them, to remind them that the earth brought forth before there was a man to till it. Gen 1:11. And then, the third year, their husbandry should return into its former channel, and they should sow and reap as they used to do. 2. The country was laid waste, families were broken up and scattered, and all was in confusion. How should it be otherwise when it was overrun by such an army? As to this, it is promised that the remnant that has escaped of the house of Judah, that is, of the country people, shall yet again be planted in their own habitations, upon their own estates, shall take root there, shall increase and grow rich. V. 30. See how their prosperity is described. It is taking root downwards and bearing fruit upwards, being well fixed and well provided for themselves, and then doing good to others. Such is the prosperity of the soul. It is taking root downwards by faith in Christ, and then being fruitful in fruits of righteousness. 3. The city was shut up, none went out or came in, but now the remnant in Jerusalem and Zion shall go forth freely, and there shall be none to hinder them, or make them afraid. V. 31. Great destruction had been made both in city and country, but in both there was a remnant that escaped, which typified the saved remnant of Israelites indeed, as appears by comparing ISA 10:22-23, which speaks of this very event, with Rom 9:27-28, and they shall go forth into the glorious liberty of the children of God. 4. The Assyrians were advancing towards Jerusalem, and would in a little time besiege it in form, and it was in great danger of falling into their hands. But it is here promised that the siege they feared should be prevented, that, though the enemy had now, as it should seem, encamped before the city, yet they should never come into the city, no, nor so much as shoot an arrow into it. V. 32-33. That he should be forced to retire with shame, and 1,000 times to repent his undertaking. God himself undertakes to defend the city. V. 34. And that person, that place, cannot but be safe, the protection of which he undertakes. 5. The honor and truth of God are engaged for the doing of all this. These are great things, but how will they be effected? Why, the zeal of the Lord of hosts shall do this. V. 31. He is Lord of hosts, has all creatures at his beck, therefore he is able to do it. He is jealous for Jerusalem with great jealousy. Zech 1:14. Having espoused her a chaste virgin to himself, he will not suffer her to be abused. V. 21. You have reason to think yourselves unworthy that such great things should be done for you, but God's own zeal will do it. His zeal, 1. For his own honor. V. 34. I will do it for my own sake, to make myself an everlasting name. God's reasons of mercy are fetched from within himself. 2. For his own truth, I will do it for my servant David's sake, not for the sake of his merit, but the promise made to him and the covenant made with him, those sure mercies of David. Thus all the deliverances of the church are wrought for the sake of Christ, the Son of David. The Assyrian army destroyed, 710 BC. 35. And it came to pass that night, that the angel of the Lord went out, and smote in the camp of the Assyrians 185,000. And when they arose early in the morning, behold, they were all dead corpses. 36. So Sennacherib king of Assyria departed, and went and returned, and dwelt at Nineveh. 37. And it came to pass, as he was worshipping in the house of Nisroch his god, that Adramelech and Sharezer his sons smote him with the sword, and they escaped into the land of Armenia, and Esarhaddon his son reigned in his stead. Sometimes it was long ere prophecies were accomplished and promises performed, but here the word was no sooner spoken than the work was done. The army of Assyria was entirely routed. That night which immediately followed the sending of this message to Hezekiah, when the enemy had just set down before the city and were preparing, as we now say, to open the trenches, that night was the main body of their army slain upon the spot by an angel. V. 35. Hezekiah had not force sufficient to sally out upon them and attack their camp, nor would God do it by sword or bow, but he sent his angel, a destroying angel, in the dead of the night, to make an assault upon them, which their sentinels, though ever so wakeful, could neither discover nor resist. It was not by the sword of a mighty man or of a mean man, that is, not of any man at all, but of an angel, that the Assyrians' army was to fall, Isa 31:8, such an angel as slew the firstborn of Egypt. Josephus says it was done by a pestilential disease, which was instant death to them. The number slain was very great, 185,000 men, and Rabshakeh, it is likely, among the rest. When the besieged arose early in the morning, behold, they were all dead corpses, scarcely a living man among them. Some think the 76th Psalm was penned on this occasion, where we read that the stout-hearted were spoiled and slept their sleep, their last, their long sleep. v. 5. See how great in power and might the holy angels are, when one angel, in one night, could make so great a slaughter. See how weak the mightiest of men are before Almighty God, whoever hardened himself against him and prospered. The pride and blasphemy of the king are punished by the destruction of his army. All these lives are sacrificed to God's glory and Zion's safety. The prophet shows that therefore God suffered this vast rendezvous to be made, that they might be gathered as sheaves into the floor. Micah 4:12-13. 2. The king of Assyria was hereby put into the utmost confusion, ashamed to see himself, after all his proud boasts, thus defeated and disabled to pursue his conquests and secure what he had. For this, we may suppose, was the flower of his army, and continually afraid of falling under the like stroke himself. He departed, and went, and returned. The manner of the expression intimates the great disorder and distraction of mind he was in. v. 36. And it was not long before God cut him off too, by the hands of two of his own sons. v. 37. 1. Those that did it were very wicked, to kill their own father, whom they were bound to protect, and in the act of his devotion, monstrous villainy. But 2. God was righteous in it. Justly are the sons suffered to rebel against their father that begot them, when he was in rebellion against the God that made him. Those whose children are undutiful to them ought to consider whether they have not been so to their Father in heaven. The God of Israel had done enough to convince him that he was the only true God, whom therefore he ought to worship. Yet he persists in his idolatry, and seeks to his false God for protection against a God of irresistible power. Justly is his blood mingled with his sacrifices, since he will not be convinced by such a plain and dear-bought demonstration of his folly in worshipping idols. His sons that murdered him were suffered to escape, and no pursuit was made after them, his subjects perhaps being weary of the government of so proud a man, and thinking themselves well rid of him. And his sons would be looked upon as the more excusable in what they had done if it be true, as Bishop Patrick suggested, that he was now vowing to sacrifice them to his God, so that it was for their own preservation that they sacrificed him. His successor was another son, Esarhaddon, who, as it should seem, did not aim, like his father, to enlarge his conquests, but rather to improve them. For he it was that first sent colonies of Assyrians to inhabit the country of Samaria. Though it is mentioned before, ch. 1724, as appears, Ezra 4:2, where the Samaritans say it was Esarhaddon that brought them thither. Chapter 20 in this chapter we have Hezekiah's sickness and his recovery from that, in answer to prayer, in performance of a promise, in the use of means, and confirmed with a sign, verse 1-11. 2. Hezekiah's sin and his recovery from that, verse 12-19. In both of these, Isaiah was God's messenger to him. 3. The conclusion of his reign, version 20-21. Hezekiah's sickness and recovery, 713 BC. One in those days was Hezekiah sick unto death. And the prophet Isaiah the son of Amoz came to him, and said unto him, Thus saith the Lord, Set thine house in order, for thou shalt die, and not live. 2. Then he turned his face to the wall, and prayed unto the Lord, saying, 3. I beseech thee, O Lord, remember now how I have walked before thee in truth, and with a perfect heart, and have done that which is good in thy sight. And Hezekiah wept sore. And it came to pass, afore Isaiah was gone out into the middle court, that the word of the Lord came to him, saying, 5. Turn again, and tell Hezekiah the captain of my people, Thus saith the Lord, the God of David thy father, I have heard thy prayer. I have seen thy tears. Behold, I will heal thee. On the third day thou shalt go up unto the house of the Lord. 6 And I will add unto thy days 15 years, and I will deliver thee and this city out of the hand of the king of Assyria, and I will defend this city for mine own sake, and for my servant David's sake. 7 And Isaiah said, Take a lump of figs. And they took and laid it on the boil, and he recovered. 8 And Hezekiah said unto Isaiah, What shall be the sign that the Lord will heal me, and that I shall go up into the house of the Lord the third day? 9 And Isaiah said, This sign shalt thou have of the Lord, that the Lord will do the thing that he hath spoken. Shall the shadow go forward 10 degrees, or go back 10 degrees? 10 And Hezekiah answered, It is a light thing for the shadow to go down 10 degrees. Nay, but let the shadow return backward 10 degrees. 11 And Isaiah the prophet cried unto the Lord, and he brought the shadow 10 degrees backward, by which it had gone down in the dial of Ahaz. The historian, having shown us blaspheming Sennacherib destroyed in the midst of the prospects of life, here shows us praying Hezekiah delivered in the midst of the prospects of death, the days of the former shortened, of the latter prolonged. Aye, here is Hezekiah's sickness. In those days, that is, in the same year in which the king of Assyria besieged Jerusalem, for he reigning reigned, in all 29 years, and surviving this 15 years, this must be in his 14th year, and so was that, ch. 1813. Some think it was at the time that the Assyrian army was besieging the city or preparing for it, because God promises, the 6 I will defend the city, which promise was afterwards repeated, when the danger came to be most imminent. Ch. 1934. Others think it was soon after the defeat of Sennacherib, and then it shows us the uncertainty of all our comforts in this world. Hezekiah, in the midst of his triumphs in the favor of God, and over the forces of his enemies, is seized with sickness and under the arrest of death. We must therefore always rejoice with trembling. It should seem he was sick of the plague, for we read of the boil or plague sore, v. 7. The same disease which was killing to the Assyrians was trying to him. God took it from him and put it upon his enemies. Neither greatness nor goodness can exempt us from sickness, from sore and mortal sicknesses. Hezekiah, lately favored of heaven above most men, yet is sick unto death, in the midst of his days, under 40, and yet sick and dying. And perhaps he was the more apprehensive of its being fatal to him because his father died when he was about his age, 2 or 3 years younger. In the midst of life we are in death. 2. Warning brought him to prepare for death. It is brought by Isaiah, who had been twice, as stated in the former chapter, a messenger of good tidings to him. We cannot expect to receive from God's prophets any other than what they have received from the Lord, and we must welcome that, be it pleasing or unpleasing. The prophet tells him, 1. That his disease is mortal, and, if he be not recovered by a miracle of mercy, will certainly be fatal. Thou shalt die, and not live. 2. That therefore he must, with all speed, get ready for death. Set thy house in order. This we should feel highly concerned to do when we are in health, but are most loudly called to do when we come to be sick. Set the heart in order by renewed acts of repentance and faith and resignation to God, with cheerful farewells to this world and welcomes to another, and, if not done before, which is the best and wisest course, set the house in order, make thy will. Settle thy estate, put thy affairs in the best posture thou canst, for the ease of those that shall come after thee. Isaiah speaks not to Hezekiah of his kingdom, only of his house. David, being a prophet, had authority to appoint who should reign after him, but other kings did not pretend to bequeath their crowns as part of their goods and chattels. 3. His prayer hereupon. He prayed unto the Lord. v. 2. Is any sick? Let him be prayed for. Let him be prayed with, and let him pray. Hezekiah had found, as recorded in the foregoing chapter, that it was not in vain to wait upon God, but that the prayers of faith bring in answers of peace. Therefore will he call upon God as long as he lives. Happy experiences of the prevalency of prayer are engagements and encouragements to continue instant in prayer. He had now received the sentence of death within himself, and, if it was reversible, it must be reversed by prayer. When God purposes mercy, he will, for this, be inquired of. Ezek 36:37. We have not if we ask not or ask amiss. If the sentence was irreversible, yet prayer is one of the best preparations for death, because by it we fetch in strength and grace from God to enable us to finish well. Observe 1. The circumstances of this prayer. 1. He turned his face to the wall, probably as he lay in his bed. This he did perhaps for privacy. He could not retire to his closet as he used to do, but he retired as well as he could, turned from the company that were about him, to converse with God. When we cannot be so private as we would be in our devotions, nor perform them with the usual outward expressions of reverence and solemnity, yet we must not therefore omit them, but compose ourselves to them as well as we can. Or, as some think, he turned his face towards the temple, to show how willingly he would have gone up thither, to pray this prayer, as he did, ch. 19:1, 14, if he had been able. And remembering what encouragements were given to all the prayers that should be made in or towards that house. Christ is our temple. To him we must have an eye in all our prayers, for no man, no service, comes to the Father but by him. 2. He wept sorely. Some gather from this that he was unwilling to die. It is in the nature of man to have some dread of the separation of soul and body, and it was not strange if the Old Testament saints, to whom another world was but darkly revealed, were not so willing to leave this as Paul and other New Testament saints were. There was also something peculiar in Hezekiah's case. He was now in the midst of his usefulness, had begun a good work of reformation, which he feared would, through the corruption of the people, fall to the ground, if he should die. If this was before the defeat of the Assyrian army, as some think, he might therefore be loath to die, because his kingdom was in imminent danger of being ruined. However, it does not appear that he had now any son. Manasseh, that succeeded him, was not born till 3 years after, and, if he should die childless, both the peace of his kingdom and the promise to David would be in danger. But perhaps these were only tears of importunity and expressions of a lively affection in prayer. Jacob wept and made supplication, and our blessed Savior, though most willing to die, yet offered up strong cries, with tears, to him whom he knew to be able to save him. Heb 5:7. Let Hezekiah's prayer interpret his tears, and in that we find nothing that intimates him to have been under any of that fear of death which has either bondage or torment. 2. The prayer itself. Remember now, O Lord, how I have walked before thee in truth, and either spare me to live, that I may continue thus to walk. If my work be done, receive me to that glory which thou hast prepared for those that have thus walked. Observe here, 1. The description of Hezekiah's piety. He had had his conversation in the world with right intentions. I have walked before thee, as under thy eye, and with an eye ever towards thee, from a right principle, in truth, and with an upright heart, and by a right rule. I have done that which is good in thy sight. 2. The comfort he now had in reflecting upon it. It made his sickbed easy. Note, the testimony of conscience for us that we have walked with God in our integrity will be much our support and rejoicing when we come to look death in the face. 2 Soar 1:12. 3. The humble mention he makes of it to God. Lord, remember it now, not as if God needed to be put in mind of anything by us. He is greater than our hearts and knows all things, or as if the reward were of debt and might be demanded as due. It is Christ's righteousness only that is the purchase of mercy and grace, but our own sincerity may be pleaded as the condition of the covenant which God has wrought in us. It is the work of thy own hands. Lord, own it. Hezekiah does not pray, Lord, spare me, or Lord, take me, God's will be done, but Lord, remember me, whether I live or die, let me be thine. 4. The answer which God immediately gave to this prayer of Hezekiah. The prophet had got but to the middle court when he was sent back with another message to Hezekiah, v. 4:5, to tell him that he should recover, not that there is with God yet and nay, or that he ever says and unsays, but upon Hezekiah's prayer, which he foresaw and which his spirit inclined him to, God did that for him which otherwise he would not have done. God here calls Hezekiah the captain of his people to intimate that he would reprieve him for his people's sake, because In this time of war, they could ill spare such a captain. He calls himself the God of David, to intimate that he would reprieve him out of a regard to the covenant made with David and the promise that he would always ordain a lamp for him. In this answer, 1. God honors his prayers by the notice he takes of them and the reference he has to them in this message. I have heard thy prayers. I have seen thy tears. Prayers that have much life and affection in them are in a special manner pleasing to God. 2. God exceeds his prayers. He only begged that God would remember his integrity, but God here promises 1. To restore him from his illness. I will heal thee. Diseases are his servants, as they go where he sends them, so they come when he remands them. Matt 8:8-9. I am the Lord that healeth thee. Exodus 15:26. 2. To restore him to such a degree of health that on the third day he should go up to the house of the Lord to return thanks. God knew Hezekiah's heart, how dearly he loved the habitation of God's house and the place where his honor dwelt, and that as soon as he was well he would go to attend on public ordinances. Thitherward he turned his face when he was sick, and thitherward he would turn his feet when he was recovered. And therefore, because nothing would please him better, he promises him this: let my soul live, and it shall praise thee. The man whom Christ healed was soon after found in the temple, John 5:14. 3. To add 15 years to his life. This would not bring him to be an old man. It would reach but to 54 or 55, yet that was longer than he had lately expected to live. His lease was renewed, which he thought was expiring. We have not the instance of any other that was told beforehand just how long he should live. That good man no doubt made a good use of it, but God has wisely kept us at uncertainties, that we may be always ready. 4. To deliver Jerusalem from the king of Assyria, v. 6. This was the thing which Hezekiah's heart was upon as much as his own recovery, and therefore the promise of this is here repeated. If this was after the raising of the siege, yet there was cause to fear Sennacherib's rallying again. No, says God, I will defend the city. The means which were to be used for his recovery, v. 7. Isaiah was his physician. He ordered an outward application, a very cheap and common thing. Lay a lump of figs to the boil, to ripen it and bring it to a head, that the matter of the disease may be discharged that way. This might contribute something to the cure, and yet, considering to what a height the disease had come, and how suddenly it was checked, the cure was no less than miraculous. Note 1. It is our duty, when we are sick, to make use of such means as are proper to help nature, else we do not trust God, but tempt him. 2. Plain and ordinary medicines must not be despised, for many such God has graciously made serviceable to man, in consideration of the poor. 3. What God appoints he will bless and make effectual. 6. The sign which was given for the encouragement of his faith. 1. He begged it, not in any distrust of the power or promise of God, or as if he staggered at that, but because he looked upon the things promised to be very great things and worthy to be so confirmed, and because it had been usual with God thus to glorify himself and favor his people, and he remembered how much God was displeased with his father for refusing to ask a sign, Isa 7:10-12. Observe, Hezekiah asked, what is the sign? Not that I shall go up to the thrones of judgment or up to the gate, but up to the house of the Lord. He desired to recover that he might glorify God in the gates of the daughter of Zion. It is not worth while to live for any other purpose than to serve God. 2. It was put to his choice whether the sun should go back or go forward, for it was equal to omnipotence, and it would be the more likely to confirm his faith if he chose that which he thought the more difficult of the two. Perhaps to this that of this prophet may refer Isa 45:11, ask me of things to come concerning my sons, and concerning the work of my hands command you me. It is supposed that the degrees were half hours, and that it was just noon when the proposal was made, and the question is, shall the sun go back to its place at 7 in the morning or forward to its place at 5 in the evening? 3. He humbly desired the sun might go back 10 degrees, because, though either would be a great miracle, yet, it being the natural course of the sun to go forward, its going back would seem more strange, and would be more significant of Hezekiah's returning to the days of his youth, Job 33:25, and the lengthening out of the day of his life. It was accordingly done. Upon the prayer of Isaiah v. 11 he cried unto the Lord by special warrant and direction, and God brought the sun back 10 degrees, which appeared to Hezekiah, for the sign was intended for him. By the going back of the shadow upon the dial of Ahaz, which, it is likely, he could see through his chamber window, and the same was observed upon all other dials, even in Babylon. 2 Chron 32:31. Whether this retrograde motion of the sun was gradual or per saltum, suddenly, whether it went back at the same pace that it used to go forward, which would make the day 10 hours longer than usual, or whether it darted back